bed chairs sit in reminder of where their owners will sit. A long three-color stripe from end to end. Our Pawtuxet. Greetings and welcome into the Pawtuxet General. I am your host, Jess. This is Parade Week. All of us here in our little burg are preparing what we're going to eat, drink, sit, and how early to get out of town. I've got a drink to commemorate this 250 year called the Blue Gaspee. Also, a make-ahead crowd pleaser, buffalo chicken deviled eggs. But first, I would like to thank our Patreon subscribers. These festive folk are the fire that burns in the grill that is the Pawtuxet General, making it possible for us to feed all of you the picnicky treats, and then sell some live at the Pawtuxet General itself. We salute you in our tricorn hats. Hurrah! Now, in time for Gaspee Days 2022, try out the Blue Gaspee. In 1976, my family and I were living in the house on the corner. It was the bicentennial and Pawtuxet Village celebrated in true Rhode Island style. Everything was red, white, and blue. At this time of year, our local ancestors are very close to the Vale. This was the first year, perhaps young as I was, that I wasn't really sure if all the costumed people I saw around me were living. Living in the house on the corner broke down reality for me a bit. But then, not only 4 months before, my dad was driving us home past our church and I saw a boy with a tweed cap and a wool jacket climb into the tree in front of the church and disappear into the leaves. I was in a VW camper van going slowly, and by the time he disappeared, I was less than 10 feet from him and I screamed. I begged Dad to turn around and I jumped out of the van as soon as he stopped. I ran around the tree. I looked everywhere, no boy. I went back to the car and asked Dad if he had seen him. He said no, that he was sorry. He was concentrating on driving. But I suspected that only I saw him. And he wasn't a live person. Months later, in the Ford truck my father drove with my sister and I in colonial dress riding in the back after the Gaspee parade. We saw the encampment of reenactors firing off cannon. In the area, by the way, where Joseph Kerwin and Charles Dexter Ward bungalow was supposed to be. As Dad drove through Fayfield, I saw revolutionary men and women walking through the woods. Then I saw trees through some of them. How could I see through? We drove to the other side and angled home before going to the block-wide party held at my parents' friend's house. Then all the normal things of Gaspee, so much food, laughter, children running amok, all punctuated by the sounds of gunfire and the smells of wood fire. 50 years later, I feel the magic about to happen, just up the street. How about make yourself a Blue Gaspee? For this recipe, you will need 1 lemon, 2 ounces of vodka of your choice, 1/2 ounce blue caraco, 1/2 ounce raspberry liqueur, a good cherry, blueberry, and lemon peel for garnish for a skewer, medium-sized ice, a large glass, highball or iced tea glass, no rimmer. However, the garnishes and the mix could in times of urgency be mixed ahead by the pitcher. But in all fairness, the drama is in just adding the ingredients over ice. And watch your pour, then add your skewer. Easy peasy. Enjoy! Buffalo chicken deviled eggs. So, as I was thinking about all those deviled eggs I ate in the 70s and about our modern taste, well, my mind wandered. But this is what, after researching all sorts of deviled egg recipes, that I came up with. There are 3 ways to do it, short, medium, or long. All are crazy tasty. I like the medium way, saves me some frying, and the chicken is always cooked fresh. But especially during the winter, the short way will do in a pinch. I also adore sriracha and keep it around the house in case we need a little pep in our step. I think this is one of my new faves. So, after years of practicing other people's methods to hard-boil an egg, I gave up, mixed their ideas, and came up with my own, and it sounds like this. A short little fall story. Once a week, always a different day, this older stately lady would come into Little Falls and ask for 1 to 3 hard-boiled eggs for her grandchild, but they must be made quickly and perfectly. So to beat the clock, I listened for her voice in line, and when I saw her, I would start the water on the fire. Once it boiled, I would put 5 cold from the fridge eggs into the boiling water for 5 minutes, then remove them and plunge them into a large vessel full of ice plus a touch of water. Stir gently until chilled, then peel under cold water. Slice lengthwise and chill. They are perfect yellow every time, no green. All right, now I think we're ready to talk about the rest of the story. For this recipe, you will need 4 spring onions chopped fine, 12 eggs hard-boiled expertly. That green bit tastes bad, and we want lovely creamy yolks. 3/4 of a teaspoon dried mustard, 2 tablespoons soft butter, 1/4 teaspoon paprika, 1/4 teaspoon cayenne pepper, 1 tablespoon mayonnaise, and the chicken. So, here are the 3 ways. The short way is to cut up frozen breaded chicken, about 10 ounces, chopped fine, breaded bits that fall off put aside for topping. The medium way is to pick up a fresh fried chicken at your local grocery store. Also chop it fine and put aside the crunchy bits to top. The long way is to actually fry chicken and have leftovers. If that is so, remember to soak it in buttermilk first overnight, then fry coated well with flour, pepper, salt, and a touch of baking soda, and a 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder. Now that you have chosen your method of chicken, mix that in with the egg yolks plus the dry mustard, soft butter, paprika, cayenne pepper, mayonnaise, and salt. Then put in a plastic bag, twist the top to create tension, then cut off the tip. Squeeze in a circle into each egg white. Top with spring onions and chicken crispies, then squeeze sriracha dotted across the eggs. And enjoy!
I want to tell you about my friend Mike and his electromagnetic pinball museum and restoration arcade. It's an all-inclusive place to relax and share anything related to modern pinball, EM pinball, and arcade games. A group of pinball and arcade fans with an addiction to games of all kinds and Lego too. $10 gets you free play on pinball and arcade games all day. You can find them at 881 Main Street, Pawtucket, Rhode Island, or online at www.electromagneticpinballmuseum.com.
And now the House in the Corner series, a reading of The Case of Charles Dexter Ward by H.P. Lovecraft. Chapter 4, Section 4. And yet, after all, it was from no step of Mr. Ward's or Dr. Willette's that the next move in this singular case proceeded. The father and physician, rebuffed and confused by a shadow too shapeless and intangible to combat, had rested uneasily on their oars while the typed notes of young Ward to his parents grew fewer and fewer. Then came the first of the month, with its customary financial adjustments, and the clerks at certain banks began a peculiar shaking of heads and telephoning from one to the other. Officials who knew Charles Ward by sight went down to the bungalow to ask why every check of his appearing at this juncture was a clumsy forgery, and were reassured less than they ought to have been when the youth hoarsely explained that his hand had lately been so much affected by a nervous shock as to make normal writing impossible. He could, he said, form no written characters at all except with great difficulty, and could prove it by the fact that he had been forced to type all his recent letters, even those to his mother and father, who would bear out the assertion. What made the investigators pause in confusion was not the circumstance alone, for that was nothing unprecedented or fundamentally suspicious, not even the Pawtuxet gossip, of which 1 or 2 of them might have caught echoes. It was the muddled discourse of the young man which nonplussed them, implying as it did a virtually total loss of memory concerning important monetary matters which he had at his fingertips only a month or 2 before. Something was wrong, for despite the apparent coherence and rationality of his speech, there could be no normal reason for this ill-concealed blankness on vital points. Moreover, although none of these men knew Ward well, they could not help observing the change in his language and manner. They had heard he was an antiquarian, but even the most hopeless antiquarians did not make daily use of obsolete phrases phraseology and gestures. Altogether, this combination of hoarseness, palsied hands, bad memory, and an altered speech and bearing must represent some disturbance or malady of genuine gravity, which no doubt formed the basis of the prevailing odd rumors. And after their departure, the party of officials discussed that a talk with the senior ward was imperative. So, on the 6th of March, 1928, there was a long and serious conference in Mr. Ward's office, after which the utterly bewildered father summoned Dr. Willett in a kind of hapless resignation. Willett looked over the strained and awkward gestures of the checks and compared them in his mind with the penmanship of that last frantic note. Certainly the change was radical and profound, but there was something damnably familiar about this new writing. It had crabbed and archaic tendencies of a very curious sort and seemed to result from a type of stroke utterly different from which the youth had always used. It was strange, but where had he seen it before? On the whole, it was obvious that Charles was insane, of that there could be no doubt, and since it appeared unlikely that he could handle his property or continue to deal with the outside world much longer, something must quickly be done towards his oversight and possible cure. It was then the alienists were called in, Doctors Peck and Waite of Providence, Dr. Lyman of Boston, and to whom Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett gave the most exhaustive possible history of the case, and who conferred at length in the now unused library of their young patient, examining what books and papers of his were left in order to gain some further notion of his habitual mental cast. After scanning this material and examining the ominous note to Willett, they all agreed that Charles Ward's studies had been enough to unseat or at least warp any ordinary intellect, and wished most heartily that they could see his more intimate volumes and documents, but the latter they knew that they could do, if at all, only after a scene at the bungalow itself. Willett now reviewed the whole case with renewed energy, it being at this time that he obtained the statements of the workmen who had seen Charles find the Carwin documents, and that he collated the incidents of the destroyed newspaper items, looking up the latter in the journal office. On Thursday, the 8th of March, Doctors Willett, Peck, Lyman, and Waite, accompanied by Mr. Ward, paid the youth their monumentous call, making no concealment of the object or questioning the now acknowledged patient with extreme minuteness. Charles, though he was inordinately long in answering the summons, and still redolent of strange and noxious laboratory odors, that when he did finally make his gated appearance, proved a far from recalcitrant subject, and admitted freely that his memory and balance had suffered somewhat from close application to obtrusive studies. He offered no resistance when his removal to the other quarters was insisted upon, and seemed indeed to display a high degree of intelligence as apart from mere memory. His conduct would have sent his interviewers away in bafflement had not the persistently archaic trend of his speech and an unmistakable replacement of modern by ancient ideas in his consciousness marked him as one definitely removed from the normal. Of his work he would say no more to the group of doctors than he had formerly said to his family and to Dr. Willett, and his frantic note of the previous month he dismissed as mere nerves and hysteria. He insisted that the shadowy bungalow possessed no library or laboratory beyond the visible ones, and waxed obtrusive in explaining the absence from the house of such odors as now saturated all of his clothing. Neighborhood gossips he attributed to nothing more than the cheap inventiveness of baffled curiosity. Of the whereabouts of Dr. Allen, he said he did not feel at liberty to speak definitely, but assured his inquisitors that the bearded and bespectacled man would soon return when needed. In paying off the old man who resisted all questioning by the visitors and enclosing the bungalow, which still seemed to hold such nighted secrets, Ward showed no sign of nervousness, save a barely noticed tendency to pause as though listening for something very faint. He was apparently animated by the calmly philosophic resignation, as if his removal were the merest transient incident which did not cause the least trouble, if facilitated and disposed of once and for all. It was clear that he trusted to his obviously unimpaired keenness of absolute mentality to overcome all the embarrassments into which his twisted memory, his lost voice and handwriting, and his secretive and eccentric behavior had led him. His mother, it was agreed, was not to be told of the change. His father supplied typed notes in his name. Ward was taken to the restfully and picturesquely situated private hospital maintained by Dr. Waite on Connecticut Island in the Bay, and subjected to the closest scrutiny and questioning by all the physicians connected with the case. It was then that the physical oddities were noticed: the slackened metabolism, the altered skin, and the disproportionate neural reactions. Dr. Willett was the most perturbed of the various examiners, for he had attended Ward all his life and could appreciate with terrible keenness the extent of his physical disorganization. Even the familiar olive mark on his hip was gone, while on his chest was a great black mole, or cicatrice, which had never been there before, and which made Willett wonder whether the youth had ever submitted to any of the witch markings, reputed to be inflicted at certain unwholesome nocturnal meetings in wild and lonely places. The doctor could not keep his mind off a certain transcribed witch trial record from Salem which Charles had shown him in the old non-secretive days, and which read, Mr. G.B. on the night put the devil his mark upon Bridget S., Jonathan A., Simon O., Deliverance W., Joseph C., Susan P., Mittable C., and Deborah B. Ward's face, too, troubled him horribly, till at length he suddenly discovered why he was horrified, for above the young man's right eye was something which he had never previously noticed, a small scar or pit precisely like that in the crumbling painting of old Joseph Kerwin, and perhaps attesting some hideous ritualistic inoculation to which both had submitted at a certain stage of their occult careers. While Ward himself was puzzling all the doctors at a hospital, and a very strict watch was kept on all the mail addressed either to him or to Dr. Allen, which Mr. Ward had ordered delivered at the family home. Willett had predicted that very little would be found, since any communication of a vital nature would probably have been exchanged by messenger. The latter part of March, there did come a letter from Prague for Dr. Allen, which gave both the doctor and the father deep thought. It was in a very crabbed and archaic hand, and though clearly not the effort of a foreigner, showed almost a singular departure from modern English as the speech of young Ward himself. It read, Kleinstrasse 11, Altstadt, Prague, 11th February, 1928. Brother in Asmaden Metreon, I this day received your mention that came up from the salts I sent you. It was wrong and means clearly that ye headstones had been changed when Barnabas got me the specimen. It is often so, as you must be sensible of the thing that you got from ye King's Chapel ground in 1769. And what H got from Old Barry's Point in 1690, that was like to end him. I got such a thing in Egypt 75 years gone, from which that came that scar ye both saw on me here in 1924. As I told you long ago, do not call up that which you cannot put down, either from dead salts or out of the spheres beyond. Have ye words for laying at all times ready, and stop not to be sure when there is any doubt whom you have. Stones are all changed now in 9 grounds out of 10. You are never sure till you question. I this day heard from H, who has had trouble with the soldiers. He is likely to be sorry Transylvania passed from Hungary to Romania, and would change his seat if the cast wasn't so full of what we know. But of this he has doubtless writ you. In my next sending will be somewhat from a hill tomb in the east, that you know that G is in Pallada better than I. Have him up first if you will, but do not use him so hard. He will be difficult, for I must speak to him in the end. Yogsoth Nivels in, Simon O. And then this, to Mr. J.C. in Providence. Yogsoth Nivels in, Simon O. to Mr. J.C. in Providence. Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett paused in utter chaos before this apparent bit of unrelieved insanity. Only by degrees did they absorb what it seemed to imply. So the absent Dr. Allen and not Charles Ward had come to be the leading spirit at Pawtuxet. That must explain the wild reference and denunciation in the youth's last frantic letter. And what of this addressing of the bearded and bespectacled stranger as Mr. J.C.? There's no escaping the inference, but there are limits to the possible monstrosity. Who was Simon O? The old man Ward had visited in Prague 4 years previously? Perhaps. But in the centuries behind, there had been another Simon O, Simon Orne, alias Jedediah of Salem, who vanished in 1771, and whose peculiar handwriting Dr. Willett now unmistakably recognized from the photostatic copies of one of Orne's formulae which Charles had once shown him. What horrors and mysteries, what contradictions and contraventions of nature had come back after a century and a half to harass old Providence with her clustered spires and domes? The father and the old physician, virtually at loss what to do or think, went to see Charles at the hospital and questioned him as delicately as they could about Dr. Allen, about the Prague visit, and what he had learned about Simon or Jedediah Orne of Salem. To all these inquiries, the youth was politely non-committal, merely barking in his hoarse whisper that he had found Dr. Allen to have a remarkable spiritual rapport with certain souls of the past, and that any correspondent the bearded man might have had in Prague would probably be similarly gifted. When they left, Mr. Ward and Dr. Willett realized to their chagrin that they had really been the ones under catechism, and that without imparting anything vital himself, the confined youth had adroitly pumped them of everything the Prague Liner had contained. Doctors Peck, White, and Lyman were not inclined to attach much importance to the strange correspondence of young Ward's companion, for they knew the tendency of kindred eccentrics and monomaniacs to band together, and believed that Charles, or Allen, had merely unearthed an extirpated counterpart, perhaps one that had seen Orne's handwriting and copied it with an attempt to pose as the bygone character's reincarnation. Allen himself was perhaps a similar case, and may have persuaded the youth into accepting him as an avatar of the long-dead Kerwin. Such things had been known before, and on the same basis the hard-headed doctors disposed of Willet's growing disquiet about Charles Ward's present handwriting, as studied from premeditated specimens obtained by various ruses. Willet thought he had placed its odd familiarity at last, and that it was vaguely resembled was the bygone penmanship of old Joseph Kerwin himself. But this the other physicians regarded as a phase of intermittentness only to be expected in a mania of this sort, and refused to grant it any importance, either favorable or unfavorable. Recognizing this prosaic attitude from his colleagues, Willett advised Mr. Ward to keep to himself the letter which arrived for Dr. Allen on the 2nd of April from Maracas, Transylvania, in a handwriting so intensely and fundamentally like that of the Hutchinson cipher that both father and physician paused in awe before breaking the seal. This read as follows: Castle Forense, 7 March 1928. Dear C, had a squad of 20 militia up to talk about the country folks say. Must dig deeper and have less herd. These Romanians plague me damnably, being officious in particular where you'd buy a man off with a drink and food. Last month M got me ye sarcophagus, and ye 5 sphinxes from ye Acropolis, where whom I called up said it would be, and I had 3 talks with what therein entombed. It will go to S.O. in Prague directly, and thence to you. It is stubborn, but you know your way with such. You show wisdom in having less about these than before. There's no need to keep the guards in shape and eating off their heads. And it made much to be found in the case of trouble, as you too well know. You can now move and work elsewhere, with no kill trouble if needful, though I hope no thing will soon force you to so bothersome a curse. I rejoice that you traffic not so much with those outside, for there was ever a mortal peril in it, and you are sensible what it did when you asked protection of one not disposed to give it. You excel me in getting formulae so another may say them with success, but Borellus fancied it would be just so if the right words were said. Does your boy often use them? I regret he grows squeamish, as I feared he would when I had him here nigh 15 months, but am sensible you know how to deal with him. You can't say him down with a formula, for that will work only upon such as the formula hath called him up from the salts, but you have strong hands and knife and pistol, and graves are not hard to dig, nor acids loath to burn. O says you have promised him B.F. I must have him after B goes to you soon, and he may give you what you wish of the dark thing below Memphis. Employ care in what you call up, and beware of your boy. It will be ripe in a year's time to have up ye legions from underneath, and there shall be no bounds to what shall be ours. Have confidence in what I say, for you know O, and I have had 150 years more than you to consult these matters in. Nephra Ka and I, Edwin H. for J. Kerwin, Esquire, Providence. But if Willett and Mr. Ward refrained from showing this letter to the alienists, they did not refrain from acting upon it themselves.
No amount of learned sophistry could controvert the fact the strangely bearded and bespectacled Dr. Allen, of whom Charles' frantic letter had spoken with such monstrous menace, was in close and sinister correspondence with two inexplicable creatures whom Ward had visited on his travels and who had plainly claimed to be survivals or avatars of Kerwin's old Salem colleagues, and that he was regarding himself as the reincarnation of Joseph Kerwin, and that he entertained, or at least advised to entertain, murderous designs against a boy who could scarcely be other than Charles Ward. There was some organized horror afoot, and no matter who started it, the missing Allen was by this time at the bottom of it. Therefore, thanking heaven that Charles was now safe in the hospital, Mr. Ward lost no time in engaging detectives to learn all they could of the cryptic, bearded doctor, finding whence he had come and what Pawtuxet knew of him, and if possible discovering his current whereabouts. Supplying the men with one of the bungalow keys which Charles yielded up, he urged them to explore Allen's vacant room, which had been identified when the patient's belongings had been packed, obtaining what clues they could find from any effects he may have left about. Mr. Ward talked with the detectives in his son's old library, and they felt a marked relief when they left at last, for there seemed to hover about the place a vague aura of evil. Perhaps it was when they heard that the infamous old wizard whose picture had once stared from the paneled overmantel, and perhaps it was something different and irrelevant. But in any case, they all have sensed the intangible miasma which centered on the carven visage in the older dwelling, and which at times almost rose to the intensity of a material emanation. Once again, I'd like to thank you for joining us here at the PG. If you would like to reach out to teach us your own local recipes or would like to invite us to your event, our email is jess@pawtuxetgeneral.com. Tell me your ghost stories. But until then, I'll meet you right back here at the Pawtuxet General. A Something for Posterity production. Pre-recorded in Pawtuxet.